Well, it's great to be here today. I had to gobble my lunch down, or I probably wasn't going to get any. And one thing I want to emphasize, I want to talk about the people that really helped me. And Mother got me into great early intervention. By the time I was 2.5, I had really great early intervention. I had all the standard autistic symptoms. I had no speech until 3.5 to 4 years old. Can't emphasize enough the importance of early intervention. And I've had parents come to me and say, well, I got a 3-year-old that doesn't talk and he rocks, and it's going to take us 2 years to get a diagnosis. And I tell them, don't wait. Get some grandmothers, get some students, get somebody to start working with that kid like right now. That's really, really, really important. And I was mainstreamed into a small, normal school, old-fashioned, highly structured 50s classroom, and I was very good at art. And my ability in art was always encouraged. You know, we got to take the thing the kid's good at and build on it. One of the things about autism is it tends to be an area of strength and an area of weakness. Art was always encouraged, and I was encouraged to do pictures of a lot of different things. Because if I'd been allowed to just draw horses all the time, well, then I'd be just still drawing horses all the time. It's very important to take the thing the kid's good at and broaden it out so they get to doing things other people, want to have done. And then a little later on in high school, some of my important mentors were, Ann, my aunt out at the ranch, and he was actually Mr. Carlock. He got an honorary doctorate for the movie. And by the way, the movie will be out in DVD in August, and the bookstore out here can probably pre-order it for you. But mentors really made a difference. But you got to get kids on the spectrum out doing stuff. Originally, I was afraid to go to my aunt's ranch. And Mother said you could be there for 2 weeks or for all summer. You got to get people out doing things. And one of the things I really liked in the movie is at the gate and all my projects, I actually built all those projects. And the dipping vat was made off the original drawings. In fact, at the end of the movie is the scene with the conference room with all the meatpacking plant guys. Those are my actual drawings laying on that table. I Xeroxed them myself down at FedEx Kinko's, rolled them up in the tube and sent them to them. And I have to say that the geek side of me really, really liked having all the projects being made. And when I was in high school, I was learning a lot of valuable job skills. I took care of 9 horses, shingled the barn, painted signs. When I was in college, I did internships. We're not doing enough with these smart kind of Asperger kids on work skills. When I was 13 years old, Mother had me working 2 afternoons a week hand sewing dresses for a lady who did freelance seamstress out of her house. And I'm seeing too many smart kids with Asperger's graduate from college, and they've never mowed a lawn or walked a dog. I mean, they have bagged a grocery. They haven't done one little stitch of work. And I think that's really bad, because there's another thing that was pounded into me as a young child was manners. I didn't exactly eat too well. I hope nobody videotaped how I ate, because I was really gobbling it down. But I remember, I talk about manners. Don't push with your finger. You're going to have to push it with your knife. Don't put your fingers in your food even though you're in a rush. You're preaching manners. Somebody's going to videotape me how I just, eaten badly and then put it on YouTube. I wouldn't want that to happen. But one of the things in working with people with autism is their thinking is detail to general. See, most people think general principle to detail. And one thing I find when people ask me questions about their child is they often be very vague. They say, well, my kid has got a behavior problem in the classroom. Well, I don't know what a behavior problem in the classroom is. Is he having a temper tantrum? Is he saying rude remarks? I mean, what exactly is he doing in the classroom? You see, for me to learn a concept, it's all by specific details. Okay, how do I understand something like bad table manners or being rude? Well, if I do something that's rude, like, let's say, comment on what somebody looked like in a really nasty way, Mother would say to me, that's rude. Or it's bad table manners. So when you eat with your mouth open, you take your fork and swirl it around up in the air like that. That's bad table manners. You see, and then I learned what bad table manners is through a whole lot of specific examples and things I kind of did to then put in the bad table manners file. What is honesty? Well, if you found a wallet with $100 in it and you gave it back, that's an example of being honest. You know, I have to learn that concept through specific examples. And if the only example I knew was to return a wallet that I found, well, then I would think honesty only applies to finding wallets. To teach the concept of honesty, I've got to have a whole lot of specific examples of honest behavior. Otherwise, I'm not going to know it. Otherwise, honesty's not going to generalize. Okay, in teaching number concepts, you know, count toy dinosaurs, count pennies, count pieces of candy. You know, that number concepts apply to a lot of different things. How do you teach up and down? Well, a kite flies up, you walk up the stairs, you go up a hill, you climb up a ladder. Those are all specific examples of up. Now, one of the things I really liked in the movie is they did an absolutely fantastic job of showing how I think visually. There's a scene in there where a whole bunch of shoes come up in rapid succession. That is exactly how I think. And that was really helpful in my work on designing equipment because I could test run equipment in my mind. I used to think that everybody could test run equipment in their mind. I didn't even know that it was a special skill. That's how I thought everybody thought, you know, until I wrote Thinking in Pictures. I also really want to credit, you know, Margaret Scarinos over here, who's the co-author with Emergence, and Anna Arena with Arena Press Academic Therapy. You know, they helped get me started. You know, when Emergence was written, you know, nobody with autism had ever written, like, what was it like to be autistic? You know, some people almost sort of didn't believe it, you know, this book was even possible. There's a scene in the movie where all the people start to listen to me. It happened kind of like that. It was at an big autism meeting, and it was a round table discussion where you'd have a bunch of tables like this. Each table was supposed to talk about a different subject. Well, I had one table, and what ended up happening is the whole room started listening to what, you know, they wanted to hear what I had to say. You know, so it was kind of like in the movie. All the work experience things in the movie, they were accurate. You know, I did get bull testicles put on my car. I did have a boss that slammed down a can of deodorant and said, "Your pit's stinking." Well, I was furious at the time. But when I look back at it, I'm glad they did that. I think being eccentric's okay. But you can't be an absolute rude slob. And I want to, you know, really credit a lot of people for helping me. I think what we'll do now is, you know, I'm going to just take questions off the floor and just start answering a whole lot of questions. This is a small enough room. I think I can hear people just fine. Okay, right here. Well, on the first, let's answer one question at a time. The first question concerned the squeezing machine. Well, I watched the cattle go in the squeeze chute, and I noticed to calm the cattle down, so I thought I would try it. And when I got into my 20s, I was highly motivated to prove I wasn't stupid. But the way I wanted to prove that was by designing things that worked. You know, and then people thought it was really weird, and I learned that what I had to do is I had to sell my work, not myself. Like I'd go to an ag engineering meeting, or I'd go out to feed yard, and they'd think I was really, really weird, and they didn't want to talk to me. But when I showed my work, my drawings, pictures of jobs, articles I'd written in the Arizona Farmer Ranchman, then I got respect. And I give this advice to a lot of people. I didn't get a single job through the normal job interview. Every single job I ever landed, even the biggest companies, was by sending a portfolio of work. And you don't want to put too much junk in it. You want something where you open it up and it's like, wow, this is really good. And in today's electronic age, sometimes it's best to send it the old-fashioned way in the mail because people do not open strange attachments because of all the viruses. And you want a few things neatly presented. Well, I had a very nice brochure of different cattle facilities. I'd have maybe an article, two articles from Beef Magazine in it, a drawing, and a plastic page with photos because they didn't have the color copiers when I got started. And it's something that somebody could open up and in 30 seconds just go, wow, that's wonderful. That's how I sold my work. And I just can't emphasize enough, especially when we're getting on the higher end of the spectrum, we're not doing enough on the work things. Also, in dealing with the employment issues, you know, you've got one end of the spectrum, maybe bagging groceries is a suitable job for the rest of the person's life. But at the other end of the spectrum, the person maybe ought to be a computer programmer at Silicon Valley, not bagging groceries. And I'm seeing too many smart people doing, being trained for employment like janitors. That's, they should be doing something much more high level than that. What drives me really nuts is I go out to a big computer conference, and there's all kinds of Asperger people walking around there, very successful, and then they look just like Shane in Big Bang Theory. They're a little older, but they wear the same kind of shirts that he wears, and they're very successful. Then I go somewhere else away from the tech companies, and I see a 12-year-old come up to me, and they want to put him on Social Security because he's not very social. And they say, well, there's nothing interesting to show him in Kansas. And I go, yes, there is. There's feed yards. There's oil wells. There's all kinds of interesting things, irrigation equipment, tractors, all kinds of farming stuff. There's lots of interesting things. It's right there. Because the thing about the doors, and the doors featured really prominently in the movie, is the problem is most people are not seeing the doors. They're there, but they don't see them. The other thing is that they don't stay open very long. When they open, you got to go through them because they go away really quickly.
Actually, I have some questions that we've collected already.
Okay.
And just as an info, I was supposed to do this before. So there are index cards at your place. And in the Unity room, there are index cards and pencils. If you have a question for Dr. Grandin, please fill it out, raise your hand, and someone will come by and get that and bring it back into the room here for you. So the runners need to kind of look around the room. But I have one here from Kim who says, I am an Aspie. I am frequently misinterpreted and misinterpret others. I am also misunderstood often, and others misunderstand me. Many times we don't even know it. What is the best way to cope?
Well, I would have to answer that question with specific situations. You see, everything that I've learned has to be specific. And the more things you can get out and get exposed to, then I go, well, that didn't work very well, telling the plant manager who was stupid. That's a really good way to lose a job. Better not do that. Don't make that mistake again. Now, but there are things where I didn't know that people had these magic little eye signals until I read about them in a book when I was 50 years old. There's a lot of things that, that today, on social things. Now, the way I got socialization was through shared interests. When I was in high school and getting tortured with teasing, I did have friends. There was Carol that I rode horses with. There were kids I did electronics with. When I got older, guys out on the construction sites and building things. I'm a big believer in getting these nerdy kids that are getting tortured into the different clubs like, drama club, music club, art club, Lego Mindstorms, robotics, just all kinds of things. History club, where they get in with a shared interest. Like I have a good friend named Jennifer Myers. She does a lot of autism talks. And she and her husband are both in the computer field. And, their idea of a romantic dinner is you go out and you get really good wine, very expensive restaurant, candles and everything, because we want to really be romantic. And then you get the really romantic subject, a 4-hour discussion of computer data storage systems. Because there's just nothing more interesting than that. And I can totally relate to that. And we've got to get them in, I find that the Aspies that are really happy are the ones that have got interesting careers. Because I go out, I went to the TED conference. You've got lots of technical people there. I can tell you there were Aspergers all over that conference. Very, very successful ones. And the thing that's interesting is the tech community gets worried about the label. They get worried about the label holding them back. Shane in Big Bang Theory is as Asperger as he comes. But that show doesn't come out and say it. This is, you see, a little bit of the autism trait can give you an advantage in something like the technical field. You get too much of the trait, and then you're nonverbal. Maybe you have a seizure disorder or epilepsy or something like that on top of it. It's a continuum of traits. But I want to see, I also get asked about disclosure. Even today, if I'm on a plane and they haven't seen the movie or anything, and they ask what I do, I just say I'm a college professor and I don't disclose anything. And then when the emergence book first came out, I didn't disclose anything to the plants. Then gradually it comes out. If they know about it, then we talk about it. If they don't know about it, I think in some cases, I have dads where their kid gets diagnosed. Should they get diagnosed? They probably are Asperger. I get worried about what that's going to do to your health insurance because it made a mess out of mine. Big, gigantic mess. But maybe it might be better in some cases to disclose some specific thing you need, like fluorescent lights bother you, or you can't multitask, or you want to have written instructions. Well, then you just say to your boss, well, email it to me. Then I've got it to refer to. But the thing that really I found, helped me to excel was I was very good at what I did. I was very good at what I do. It got down to selling my work. And proving that I wasn't stupid was a gigantic motivator for selling my work.
Okay, got a lot of questions here. Next is, if you were in school now, what advice would you give to teachers?
Develop the area of strength. Too often in special ed, we pound away on the disability. Algebra was just impossible. I should have been jumped to geometry and trig. That wasn't done. That was a mistake. Develop the area of strength. I can't emphasize that enough. Take the kid's fixations and broaden them out. He likes trains. Let's read a book about trains. If all he wants to do is draw pictures of trains, let's do the train station. Let's do a picture of some place the train goes to. In other words, get an associative link back to the thing that he's interested in.
Okay. What can the community do to make sure that our kids can find jobs? You talked a lot about employment.
Well, we need to find bosses that are going to tolerate some eccentricity. And, it's finding employers that are good. I mean, I want to commend the Walgreen company, the drugstore chain. They've redone the computers in their warehouses so you don't have to be able to read to do the warehouse computers. And I've asked, companies have been very progressive about employment, how well the warehouse managers and things, how easy is it to train the warehouse managers? They said 80% of them is fine, 10 or 20% are bad. And you know what? It's the same thing I find in my livestock handling. You got about 10 or 20% of people, maybe they just shouldn't be touching cattle because they're not nice to them. and in working on the animal welfare programs with McDonald's on auditing meat plants, there were 75 approved suppliers. 3 plant managers had to be removed out of 75. That's they just wouldn't change their old-fashioned ways of doing things. We've got to show people that how this person can be a really good employee. In the tech community, get them involved with the tech community because they've already got tons of people on the spectrum. Okay. Okay, so what worries you most about the education today of children that are on the autistic spectrum? Well, the problem, that's too broad because I have found that it so much depends upon the particular teacher and the particular schools. One district's just awful, the next district's just great. One school's dreadful, another school over in another town is just fine. So many things depend upon the particular people and the particular place.
I know that you talked about this last night in our group, but one person's asking as a teacher specifically about sensory integration and how the best way to work with students that have those kinds of issues.
Well, sensory problems are really real, and they're not limited just to autism. All kinds of learning difficulties have sensory issues, dyslexia, ADHD, tons of different kinds of developmental disorders have sensory difficulties. Sound sensitivity, loud noises hurt the ears. I had problems with that. A lot of brain problems, you don't hear auditory detail. In other words, you don't hear the hard consonant sounds. And my speech teacher would enunciate things like, she'd say, ka-pa, or dog-ga. She'd carefully enunciate the consonants so I could hear them. Because when grown-ups yacked really, really fast, I didn't understand what they said. When they talked slowly to me, then I understood. Some kids have visual processing problems. Now, I don't have this. Sensory problems are very variable. One kid may have a lot of auditory problems, another kid has a lot of visual problems. And some kids absolutely cannot tolerate 60-cycle fluorescent lights. And people ask me, what would you put in a school or something for kids with autism and developmental problems? No 60-cycle fluorescent lights. So what are we going to do to be green and be energy conservation? Well, you're going to have to get electronic fluorescent lights that cycle at a much, much higher frequency. That is probably the single worst thing in the classroom. I had a dyslexic student that just spaced out and couldn't think when she had to be around 60 cycle fluorescent lights because the whole classroom was flickering like a discotheque. It was absolutely horrible. And some kids, when they go to read, the print like jiggles on the page, and they're looking at the corner of their eye all the time. They might be terrified of escalators because they can't tell how to get on and off of them. Let's talk about some simple things we can do for those kids. Laptop computer screens don't flicker. TV-type computer screens flicker. Now we've got all these new high-def screens. I'm not sure about those because I no longer have the students to test them on. But a laptop or an LCD screen, that's your gold standard. So any new screen technology that comes out has to be equal to or better than a laptop. And some people are really helped by the Erlen-colored glasses, where you try on different pale-colored sunglasses, pink and lavender, until you find the ones where the print no longer jiggles. That really helped my dyslexic student. I find in my livestock design class, out of 35 students, I have one every semester that's got this problem. And there's a certain kind of really messy way, awful way they do their drawings that I can tell. Okay, if I ask them to draw a line and put 3 half circles like this on it, just freehand, they can't do it. This has nothing to do with knowing about cattle. It's all over the place like this. I send them out, go down to Walmart, go shopping for some like pale pink or pale purple sunglasses, and they come back and they tell me now they can see better at night when they're driving, and they can print no longer jiggles on the page. And one little girl could tolerate only 5 minutes at a Walmart or a Target store, and after getting some little pink glasses, she could do an hour. Now, the advantage of using Erlen lenses is they can give you the exact precise color. So that works better than just buying the approximate color. I was a pressure seeker. A lot of kids are calmed by deep pressure over wide areas of the body. If you use weighted vests, it's 20 minutes on, and then you got to get it off for a while. Then people ask me, well, what about a weighted blanket at night? Well, he's asleep after 20 minutes, hopefully, so that's fine. But the mistake people make is leaving it on too long. Sometimes sitting on a ball, doing balancing, can kind of stabilize the nervous system, because a lot of kids, their hearing is like a bad mobile phone connection. So when you do some of these sensory integration things, it's sort of like taking that phone outside and it gives you a better little connection. And you don't have as much scrambling. There's a lot of these kids, this whole sensory systems are scrambled, all the incoming stuff is scrambled. It's just a mess. One of the areas where I would put a lot of research money in is the sensory issues. They can be very debilitating. How can you socialize if you can't tolerate being in a noisy restaurant or a noisy stadium or a place like that? And I think the things the OTs do with sensory integration, I think that's part of a good program. And a lot of schools, you can only get it for an hour a week. And what I tell parents is, go in and see what the OT's doing, and then you do a whole bunch more of it. And then you're getting the professional direction from an OT. And I want things done with professional direction. But a lot of places, as I travel around the country, they get like 2 hours of speech a week and maybe 1 hour of OT. I say to parents, go find out what that teacher's doing and then do a whole bunch more of it. Because you've got to get the hours in with these little kids.
Okay. It says, I just read an article by a nonverbal autistic who made a point of saying that he felt autism was more a physical challenge than a neurological. He wrote that he knew in his mind what he was supposed to try to do, eye contact, stop flapping, for example, but couldn't get his body to react. As a high-functioning autistic, what are your thoughts as to how much you are affected by any mind-body disconnect?
That's really interesting. And what I have kind of found, as some of these sensory problems get worse, the social parts of the brain actually tend to sort of be normal. Years ago, I made this graph where sort of like as the sensory problems got worse, he's right, because he can't control it. And there's people that are nonverbal where they can't. The circuits that integrate movement and stuff like that are completely messed up. If you're interested in learning more about some of those things, there's a book by Tito Mukhopadhyay, How Can I Talk If My Lips Don't Move? And he describes fractured sensory processing, and anyone who's working with people that are nonverbal needs to read that. I think it's an excellent, excellent book. You see, the thing is, I think autism kind of can be different things to different people. For him, it's more of a physical problem. For somebody that's a real smart Aspie, you know, kind of a geek, yeah, there's a bunch of social circuits are gone, and they don't have the movement problems. I think.
Okay, yeah. Person asks, says, my daughter, this is along the same lines, my daughter has severe autism and does not speak. How can they, as parents, better understand what she is thinking? Kind of looking.
Well, there are some that can't speak, they can learn to type, and I think the keyboard needs to be introduced. Just start out getting them to, you know, request, starting with nouns, just learning whole words, and don't worry about proper typing. One finger's fine. And you know, if a kid isn't speaking by about 6, I think we need to start working with the, you know, keyboard. I think there's also a need for, you know, better augmentative devices. You know, looking at places where to put money in for research. Sensory is a big area where I'd put money in, and then also some better ways so maybe they can just think about something and they can get the computer to do what they want.
Well, what advice do you have for parents who are making the decisions about what kinds of medications, diets, or treatments are appropriate for their children?
I am really sick and tired of all the fight between conventional and regular medication. Sometimes a little of each is best. I'm appalled at the amount of heavy-duty psychiatric drugs handed out to 5-year-olds like candy. So I travel around the country and you've got 5-year-olds loaded up on Risperdal. I think that's absolutely atrocious. So my bias is going to be very young kids, let's try some of the diets. They're gluten-free, they're dairy-free. That really helps for some kids. And a specific carbohydrate where you take out, it's sort of like an Atkins, and you take out a lot of the white carbs and sugar. I'm kind of doing that right now to control my yeast infections. And I've pretty well have taken gluten out, but not casein. And that's helped me. Plenty of exercise. These kids are not getting enough exercise. Things like the fish oil supplements. The research is showing very clearly those are good for the brain. But there's way too much sugar and high glycemic carbs in the American diet, and there's a brand new paper in the American Journal of Psychiatry that shows that that they'll get kind of a crappy diets related to depression. You know, so let's do some of those things first. Now, when I got into puberty, I started having absolute horrible anxiety attacks, and the movie showed me pre-antidepressant medication. And in my early 30s, I went on disipramine, which is an old-fashioned tricyclic antidepressant, and it made the horrible panic attacks and anxiety go away. I wouldn't be here now if I hadn't gone on that medication. You know, a little tiny dose of Prozac or Zoloft, that can cut the anxiety. The mistake that's made with people on the spectrum is giving too much. I've had 100 parents say to me, ooh, little dose was wonderful. We doubled the dose, now he can't sleep, and he acts like he's drunk 500 cups of coffee. You know, oftentimes people on the spectrum need like half to 1/4 the starter dose of something like Prozac. The other thing is a lot of old drugs that really work. You know, where today, of course, the drug companies are pushing things like Abilify and Seroquel because they're patented, but those have much more severe side effects than maybe a little bit of Prozac or maybe a little bit of one of the anti-seizure drugs. You know, some of those can be helpful. In Thinking in Pictures, I have a whole section on medication called A Believer in Biochemistry. The other thing is, you got to get logical. Try one thing at a time and try to figure out what's working. Now, obviously, of course, I'd rather have scientific articles, you know, for evidence, but the problem that is autism is so variable that when you do a scientific study, you're putting apples, oranges, and pears all together, and so you might try something like the colored glasses and you show they don't work. Because if you had 10 people with autism, maybe they only work on 2. But I'm talking about going down and doing a screening test at the local Walmart, which costs you absolutely nothing. I mean, it'd be stupid to have a kid flunk out of school because he didn't buy a $15 pair of glasses at the local Walmart. That's beyond stupid. So how do I evaluate, you know, what I'm going to do? I'd rather go with scientifically based things first, but that doesn't mean I'm going to throw out other things, especially things that are really easy to try. You know, cheap and easy to try, not dangerous in any way. You know, so you might as well try on the colored glasses, or you try a weighted vest. You don't like it, throw it away. You can make them. They're not even very expensive. And get logical. People are always looking for the single magic bullet, the single magic turning point. Well, there isn't one. And Another mistake that's made is they'll put a kid on 3 drugs all at once for a behavior problem. You try one at a time. You've got to think really logically. You need to keep a diary. And if you're going to give a powerful drug to a young kid, it better have some big wow. Like, wow, this stuff's really wonderful. Otherwise, it's probably not worth the risk. But I know quite a few older adults that refuse to try medications that are miserable, and they should be taking them. Okay, let's get back to powerful drugs like Risperdal. There are some people where a tiny, tiny dose, like 1/4 milligram a day, or even a little kid, 1/10 milligram a day. These little homeopathic level doses of Risperdal helps on sound sensitivity. And taking that tiny, tiny little dose, you're probably not going to get many side effects.
Again,
Okay.
this question reads, my daughter doesn't want to be, quote, defined by her affliction, unquote. And so she doesn't want preferential treatment in school. So far, she's been successful academically. She's 12 years old. And socially, the road is bumpy. Shall I wait for her to ask me for intervention?
Well, I get kind of concerned when I have a young 12-year-old come up to me, a real smart 12-year-old, and he's defining himself as Asperger's first. I'd rather have him come up to me and say, well, I want to be a chemist, or I want to be an artist, or I'm really interested in astronomy, or whatever, or band, or music, or whatever his thing is. Even now, I don't define myself as autism first. In fact, I've had to fight to not have it totally take over. People say, why don't you just give up livestock? Well, I think it's important to have a real job. And I don't want to be a professional autistic, basically. And I get worried about too much where a child comes up and he's identifying himself strictly as having autism. Now on some of the social issues, I had a horrible time in high school with social issues. I got teased. It was horrible. I got kicked out of 9th grade for throwing a book at a girl who was teasing me. It was absolutely, beyond terrible. But I had refuges away from teasing, like horseback riding, shared interests. Get her involved in, what's that daughter good at? Whose question is that? What are they good at? What's she good at? She likes anime. I'd like to get her art skills spread out into something more than anime. You see, we've got to get, this is something that Mother worked with me really young, because in order for me to do something with my art skill professionally when I grew up, I had to draw stuff that other people want. And I can tell you now, if you want to go to art school and you send in a portfolio of just anime, then it's not going to fly. Okay. But maybe get her involved in other kinds of drawing stuff. Maybe she needs to go and take some formal training in art, and it's not going to be anime. We need to broaden out that skill, because one of the things that the kids have got to learn is how to do an assignment for somebody else. Like I have a picture that I show on my slideshow of this ugly plywood shed ski-tow house. And then when I got done with it with white trim and tongue and groove siding, it looks really nice. I didn't paint cows all over it. I made it in a way that other people would like. And she's got to learn how to do art projects that other people want. And there's 10,000 portfolios out there of anime. Okay, well then, well, that's fine, but then let's try to broaden it out and be drawing some other kinds of things. Because we need to start thinking about, what can she do when she grows up? Because basically, what I do with design, with the cattle design, that was based on art skill.
Along the lines of interests, how do you limit computer and video game use?
Video games, if those had been around when I was a kid, I would have been a total addict. It's 1 hour a day. If you want to spend 8 hours a day programming and making your own game, that's fine. But it's only going to be 1 hour a day playing them. We've got to get them off their duffs, doing other things. We don't ban the video games and endless video watching on the internet, but they're allowed to do an hour a day of that. And then the rest of the time, they got to be doing other stuff. Because if, let's say when I was in high school, I'd sat in my room and had done nothing but playing video games, I wouldn't have learned job-related skills, like taking care of 9 horses and things like that. Nope, we've got to limit it because some of these kids are getting, they're total addicts to it. There's something about watching those animated images move that's just, hypnotic. When I was a little kid, even if a cartoon was in an advertisement, I wanted to watch it. Stupid advertisement like for Hostess cupcakes or some, dumb thing like that, and I'd want to watch that. There was something about a line drawings moving that really attracted my attention.
What do you think about the proposed DSM change of listing autism, Asperger's /DDD, NOS under autism spectrum disorder?
Well, from a scientific standpoint, Asperger's is not a separate disorder. That is very clear scientifically. It is a continuum of traits. When does Asperger become geek and nerd? There is no black and white dividing line. And I am saying that absolutely, totally seriously. So scientifically, it's correct. But what I'm concerned about is what it's going to do down in the practical world and service provider world. And it could be a real mess, and it could be very variable from state to state on exactly how that's going to be handled.
Can you tell us about what kids are seeing and experiencing when they self-stimulate, like flicking, sounds, etc.?
Well, self-stimming behavior is calming. And I was allowed to have an hour after lunch where I could do it. So my feeling about self-stimming is we don't ban it, but we have some places where they can do it, and there's some places we don't do it. Church, synagogue, dining room table, granny's dinner table, shopping malls. So there's some places we don't do it. And then they can have some places where they can have some downtime and do it. And I had an hour after lunch, and I had about half an hour after dinner where I could do some of that stuff, and it was in my room I had to do it. Because self-stimming is calming. And the problem is, it's like taking a drug. And if the kid did that all the time, his brain's not going to develop. Because when you self-stim, you can shut off the world.
If you could create the ideal higher education experience for a person with autism, what would it be? For example, how many courses per semester or how many years should a person be?
Well, that's going to vary. I mean, I took the regular load. I had decided I was going to study, and I pulled myself together and took the regular load. And I didn't have any problems with the academics. A lot of problems with living in the dorm, in the noisy dorm. That was a problem. This is where it's going to be variable. There are some individuals that definitely need to take a lighter load and go more slowly. Definitely, definitely, definitely. I also strongly recommend that while you're in college and in high school that you're getting work experience. When I was in college, I did an internship at a research lab. I was still going out to my aunt's ranch, and I worked one summer as a counselor, for a program that had autistic children in it. They've got to get work experience. I mean, I cannot emphasize that enough. And they also need to major in something that's going to make them employable. And you take the kind of Asperger's of the word thinkers, they tend to love history. Well, history major's not a very good major for getting jobs. They need to be taking journalism along with it and library science or something where you're going to be a lot more employable. We got to have a lot more emphasis on what are they going to do when they grow up.
This is from Rick B. I have a 9-year-old son on the spectrum. The movie gave the impression that as a child you were frightened. What kinds of circumstances frightened you? People, things?
I was frightened of a lot of sensory things. Like this, so we'd go on this ferry boat and the horn would go off and it just hurt my ears, but it also caused a huge fear thing. I also had a lot of fear. Somebody had balloons in the room. I didn't like it because I was afraid they might pop. Some kids are afraid of dogs because they're afraid he might bark and it'll hurt their ears. So this brings up the whole thing. Well, is a service dog a good idea? It depends. Some kids it's the best thing you could possibly do. Others, it would not be. But a lot of the fears are sensory-based. Or the fear you're going to get subjected to it. Like a smoke alarm went off in this room over there last week, so you're scared to death to go in that room because you're afraid that the smoke alarm is going to go off again. And that's going to blow your ears out.
How best to motivate or to help children find their own motivation to do, to try, to work at skills that they, quote, don't want to do or don't like to do?
Well, one of the things you got to do, and I didn't really want to do math, is to link that skill into some other goal. When I finally got the goal of wanting to become a scientist, then that motivated me to study English and history, which I only got bad grades in because I didn't study. Okay, now I realized I had to study English and history if I wanted to achieve my goal of becoming a scientist. You know, that's one way, you know, you get them motivated. But the other thing I always ask, like, what's the kid like to do? You know, what is he good at? You know, people ask me, well, how can you figure out what the kid's good at? Well, by 3rd or 4th grade, if they got drawing skill, you'll see it. If they got math skill, you'll see it. And you might have a kid that needs to go 3 grades ahead in math and needs special ed in reading. That's kind of a common pattern. So you're not going to see special skills at age 2. And often not at age 5. I mean, my drawings at age 5 were, I can actually remember Valentine's I made at age 5, and they were just supposed to paint kiddie scribbles. They weren't, I can remember doing them. There was nothing special about them. You know, some of the really great things I did in art, it was 3rd and 4th grade before that came out. So I look at, so I ask questions like, what's the kid's best courses in school? What does he like to do? You know, I want how to, you know, okay, the kids that like math, they're going to excel at math stuff. And then there's a kind of kid that can just figure out all the math problems without doing the work, and their brain works differently. I'd say let them do that. Lunch, you just got to make sure you rule out cheating. You got to lock them in a room somewhere and give them problems they couldn't possibly have gotten off the internet, and take all the electronics away. And if they can do it where you can absolutely rule out cheating, then I'd let them do it. They don't think the same way you do. Because it was a shock to me when I wrote Thinking in Pictures to discover just how different my thinking was. And I started asking people, you know, this is when I figured out my thinking was different. Well, think about a church steeple. And I was shocked to find out other people didn't see specific examples. They'd see this generalized vague one. I see just specific examples. And they come up in a series of pictures just like in the movie, and then I put them in the church steeple file folder.
How did you overcome your own shyness and hesitancy to be in social groups?
Well, Mother was always pushing me out and getting me to do stuff. Now, when I did my first talk in graduate school, first lecture in graduate school, I panicked and walked out. So you basically have to do stuff. This is where you see, to get a kid to advance, you got to push a bit. Now, you don't want to push to the point where they freak out and you know, have a meltdown, but if you don't push at all, there won't be any advancement. And the other thing is no surprises. I was given pictures of the ranch and had talked to Ann on the phone, and I had an idea of, I was given a brochure that some pictures and, you know, maps and everything else, so I had some idea of where I was going. It was not a surprise.
So also, can you talk a little bit about your life and taking care of yourself after you leaving your parents' home?
Well, getting out and living on my own, well, I just moved to an apartment building that was across the street from the dorm at Arizona State University. That helped. And then, you know, those scenes in the movie, like with stuff with the deodorant and things like that, where the deodorant was slammed down, that actually happened. And I was furious at the time. But I look back at some of those other bosses I had, and they were doing me a big favor. And the guy that slammed the deodorant down, he was as Asperger as they come. And I actually showed Mick Jackson, the director, exactly how to slam it down on the table. And they duplicated it exactly.
How best can we as parents help educators understand our Aspie kids? Sometimes, this parent writes, I get frustrated because I'm helping the teachers as much as I'm trying to help my son.
Well, you have to, the thing is with me, there was absolute consistent discipline between home and school. And I, you know, so oftentimes, you know, people ask me, you know, what do you think of this school or that school? So much depends upon the particular teacher's particular situation. And a lot of times you are going to have to, you know, explain a lot of things to the teachers. And it's just like today, you go in and see the doctor, and then you tell the doctor what Dr. Google had to say, and a lot of doctors don't like that. But I found in my own health problems that Dr. Google's been exceedingly helpful, because I got TMJ, where the joint here locks up and I couldn't chew. Well, there were some exercises, and Dr. Google said, like, bend your tongue back, touch the little dangly thing in the back of the throat. I did that 4 times a day for 3 months. It worked. I got that from Dr. Google. But Dr. Google has a lot of junk in it too. You know, you've got to, you know, But all the reputable web pages all said that people jump into surgery way too quick for that particular problem.
How can companion animals, dogs, cats, horses, etc., help children with autism?
Well, teaching responsibility. You see, back again, this gets back. You teach responsibility through specific examples. You have to feed the dog every day. You got to walk him every day. You know, the dog's not going to be very happy if he doesn't get played with and walked.
Temple, could you describe how you learned to read and write?
Well, reading, I was not reading by 3rd grade, and Mother taught me with phonics. Now, there are some kids that learn by phonics. Others learn whole word, and phonics will actually mess them up. And most autistic kids learn whole word. You just start learning nouns and up and down, and then you start piecing the words together.
How should authorities treat autistic people who get into trouble with the law? And should an individual with autism be tasered by police?
Well, I think it depends upon what he was doing, for one thing. And there is one of the things they got to learn is policeman pulls you over. It's yes, sir. Yes, I'll get my license, sir. That is the time to be little Mr. or Mrs. Total Absolute Polite Manners, period. That is the rule. And I have a rule system I still live with. And if you want to have a civilized society, you can't have people stealing things, burning down buildings, and killing each other. That's a really bad things category. Then you have the courtesy rules. And then you have some illegals, but not bad. And there's a lot of stupid school rules that probably need to be broken. But then you have the sins of the system. And these are rules you absolutely don't break. The penalties are draconian. Police officer pulls you over, you know, like some Asperger person will say, well, I have a problem with authority. Well, I'm sorry. Policeman pulls you over and says, yes, sir. Yes, sir. And if you didn't like something the policeman did, you can make a complaint afterwards, you know, but not during the thing. It is yes, sir, I will get my license, sir. And there's no sassing back. That's the rule. Because you can get in 10 tons of trouble. And the other thing that's a big problem is anger management. I got kicked out of high school for anger. And after the horseback riding was taken away for 2 weeks, I somehow switched from anger to crying. And if I hadn't switched from anger to crying, I wouldn't have been able to have a career. And I've had some parents say, well, I don't like the fact my teenage boy cries. I said, be thankful. Crybabies keep work, and crybabies don't go to jail. It's that, because one of the problems in autism is controlling emotion. It's because there's some circuits missing that are frontal cortex top-down control on emotion. And I couldn't control the emotion, so I switched an emotion where I could just go off and hide somewhere. Yeah, I was still miserable, but I would just go off and hide. I want the little chocolate thing. Okay.
We have two more
Okay.
questions, and then we're done. Do you believe, and in fact, we may end on this one and one more, but do you believe that the incidence of autism has truly increased?
I think some of the mild Asperger's is just increased diagnosis. They've always been here. I can think of kids I went to school with that we labeled Asperger today. That's just increased diagnosis. But on the other hand, I think there is some severe autism that has increased.
And you started in the beginning of your presentation talking about table manners and the importance of that people need to learn these things. So this person says, yes, but what do I do when my son doesn't care about good table manners?
Well, there were some consequences for that. You know, TV would be taken away. You know, that was the main thing. One day a TV would be taken away, or today it would be one day of video game, your hour of video game playing would be taken away. No, there were consequences for that kind of stuff. And there were a few times of consequences to this. And I only remember that happening twice, but that sort of established the authority. I'll tell you a little story about a lady that I know. Her 13-year-old decided he was not autistic, just to being a brat. 13-year-old decided he didn't want to go to school. He wasn't going to take a shower. He wasn't going to get out of bed. And he just told his mother he wouldn't do it. So he was asleep, and she went out and got a boat oar. And She whacked him once right there. Yep. He went up and he took the shower and everything was fine. She'd established her dominance. You know, this whole thing about corporal punishment is very controversial. But I think there is a place sometimes for a single harsh correction. People that beat animals or kids all the time, that's abuse. But there's sometimes a place for single harsh correction. And it's not something you do all the time. And you know what? The kid was fine after that. Went to school and she sort of established the dominance. And it was done once. You know, it was just on the soft part of the butt. So she made sure she didn't injure him in any way.
Great.
You know,
well,
she was
thank you so much, Dr. Grandin, for being here today and sharing your insight.